Hi, Vicky. Hello, Vicky. And Brian. Hello, Brian. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Good. Hi, Vicky.
Hi.
Jody's here.
Hi.
You just,
Hi.
Jody, when do you leave the planning commission? We're going to miss you.
Oh my gosh, no, you don't say goodbye yet.
Okay.
Not till next August.
Oh, good.
Oh,
Yes, so I'm sorry. You're stuck with me for a while.
Oh, good. Well, that's good. You've got a lot of memory.
Well,
Or are you losing your memory?
you're getting, yeah, exactly. That's the issue. So you better ask lots of questions before while I still have it.
Okay. Well, we may contact you even afterwards just to tap your.
I'm not going anywhere.
Good.
Yeah.
You can always apply to the tree commission.
Yeah, Brian has already made that pitch. I have gratefully declined.
I know, he told me. I thought I'd try one more time.
I'm moving on. I've got other things to do.
Oh, there's Jeff and there's Mark. We actually have a quorum right now, don't we, Brian? Brian is my mentor. If I goof today, he's going to ring a bell. Well, oh, here comes. There's Tim, and we'll wait till Jeff comes on. He's the.
Hello.
Hi, Tim. I think Jeff's coming in. Jeff, are you there? We just lost Mark. How do you whip these people up there, Brian?
Mark has to plug in his laptop because it's only good for a half an hour.
But don't leave us, Mark. All right, I think I'll start. I'm sure Jeff is listening or going to come in. So thank you for coming. Just let everybody know, this is my first time at the head here after following Brian's good leadership. I think everything will go well, but let's see. Last week in an important meeting, as Rian will know, my internet went out. This morning I woke up and my computer was dead. So not good beginnings. Anyway, I've asked Jeff, our co-captain, to take over if all of a sudden I disappear from the screen. So let's hope everything goes well. So the first thing I'd like to do is just a little bit of housekeeping. One, you probably noticed in your packet that we had a calendar. There were just a couple things on there that we updated. We didn't really think.
Yes.
Let's see. Jean, are you muted?
No, I'm going to.
Okay, thank you. A couple of things we updated that everyone seemed to agree to that when we went over the calendar. One is that Vicky had suggested we look at the agenda for the Virginia legislature toward the end of the year. So we added that. And then I think it was either Mark or Jeff P who suggested that since Mark Z does such a good job reporting about the tree stewards, that he do it twice a year. So we added that. So I think you all had already approved that. Another thing to let you know, and some of you may know, I'm afraid Jacqueline has stepped down. She's recently taken a new job, has too many commitments, so she has stepped down. That leaves 4 possible vacancies on the tree commission come March. So I want you to beat the bushes, and anyone out there in our fan club who's listening, please apply. The applications are open until March 11th. And City Council will make an announcement on March 22nd. There are 2 places for representatives from low-income neighborhoods. Of course, we're always looking for diversity to represent the population of the city. So tomorrow or soon, I will send out, Jeff, take notes, the application link so that you can send it to all your friends and relatives and see if we can get a good pool of applicants. So with that, I'd like to, I think all of you have probably looked at the minutes. We had 3 minutes to approve tonight. I want to let you know that the staff of Parks has really been helping us. The November minutes were done by Brian. The December and January minutes were done by staff and with Mark R. Reviewing, editing them. So does anybody have any comments? Oh, it looks like everyone's happy. Good. Do I have a motion to approve? Raise your hand. Mark, second. All right. All approve? Raise your hand. All right, good. Thank you. We are doing well here. All right.
We've done in a half hour. I like your meetings, Peggy. No offense, Brian.
All right, so the second item on the agenda is the staff report. I think we have Rian here, and he's going to give us an update on some things. First, I'd like to say, I really appreciate the staff we have. First of all, they are way overworked. Second of all, we don't have an urban forester. And both Rian and Chris have been so responsive, and I certainly appreciate it. We are looking forward to have me and them are looking forward to have a new urban forester take some load off both of our backs. But anyway, Rian, if you could just give us, or Chris, who's over here, give us an update on those 4 items.
Sure. So I just got a few items for update. The one update is that thanks to Peggy, I was not aware that there was 2 separate links to the tree commission. I have put in that request and they're looking into it. So at least we only have 1 landing page for the tree commission. So thank you for bringing that to our attention. So I'm working diligently on that and also trying to clean up that page as well. The other major thing that has been going on, as you are aware, we had 2 major storms, and one last weekend was a minor storm. As I mentioned last month, I was kind of gonna give you a quick summary of trees, what's the location, and what's the status on our trees. So again, and this is just not in Charlottesville, the surrounding areas. In the first storm, we lost a good amount of trees, and I'll break that down into sections. So just keep in mind, it is not accurate. Reason being, phone calls will go to Public Works Dispatch, and some phone calls will come to Parks and Rec, and others will go to NDS. So I'll try to gather as best possible data. So I'll start with the dispatch from Public Works. They have reported 42 downlines in the first storm. What that means is a tree has fallen on the downlines and that need to be taken care of. So roughly around about 42 trees just on the right of way, and these are just phone calls from Public Works that Public Works received. So 42 trees came down. Also, if you look at schools, we lost roughly around about on school property around about 20 to 30 trees at schools. And a lot of cleanup with branches, split branches. We are still busy evaluating with our contractor. He's going out, he's giving us assessment, and the assessments are basically saying this tree, we'll just trim up this tree, the tree will survive. Other assessments would be, you know what, it was such a bad break that the tree won't survive. And we're looking at different options. How do we keep the tree still alive instead of just eliminating the tree? So that's the school parks. In the parks, we lost rough around about 20 to 30 trees in parks as well. Different parks. We have roughly around about 26 parks. Most of our trees we found out was Jordan, tree fell, big tree fell, and it actually destroyed one of our playgrounds. Penn Park at the golf course, a good amount of trees fell down there. Northeast Park, also Azalea Park. I believe it got into a concession stand, and we have to replace the whole roof on that. So that's roughly about 20 to 30 trees and over 50 type of breaks within the park system. Cemetery, Oakwood Cemetery, we have 2 to 3 trees down. We are still waiting for the contractor. He's just waiting to see if everything gets melted, because he just doesn't want to bring his equipment over the graves and damage that. So once everything is settled, he can see the ground, he'll come in and remove those trees in Oakwood. We do have one tree that is leaning in the other cemetery, and it's leaning real bad. We have sent out our contractor. That one, he's going to try to save, reason being it's split from the top. So the top is dying, but with the way the tree is growing, it's leaning to one side, and you'll see with the last snow, it's really leaning. So he's going to go out and try to trim it up so there's not a lot of weight on those branches. Right of way, as you saw, one of our worst right of ways is West Main Street. It was just, in my opinion, just a disaster with that snow. We did the best that we could. We haven't removed major trees, but we tried to take care of the limbs, and now we're going to send out our contractor just to give us a good assessment on those trees. So that is a quick summary. So roughly, as you can see, a lot of trees. And again, you know, the second storm, we got phone calls as well on down trees. Even the light snow that we had on the weekend, 1 or 2 trees fell down. So yeah, so it's not good news. We lost a good amount of trees, roughly about 100 trees in the storm all over the city. Moving on, any questions on that?
Just make a comment. I think if you look at our data from last year, we lost about 118 trees, or they had to be removed. So in one day, we've almost matched that, which is pretty sad.
Yep. So the other update agenda item, we are busy working with a contractor of the replanting of the trees. Park staff is out flagging those trees. We are going to run into a few problematic areas, meaning problematic areas are there's certain species, and thanks to Peggy assisting us to see if we can find them in Virginia or if we need to substitute. So there will be some substitutes made with the tree planting. The other problematic area is the species that was chosen in certain spots will not be a good species due to the amount of space. For example, on the right of way, there's roughly about 3 to 4 feet difference, but they're planning on planting 5 oaks, and it's and just the distance spacing. In the next 10 years, it will probably be hanging all into the road. So we're looking at those type of those things and trying to work with a contractor to see, hey, is there any way, what can we do to work together in order to make sure we have the right species for that small plot of land. But I did extend their contract. The contract was supposed to be done in February. We are moving it all the way to the end of February. They are coming into town at the end of this week to start doing some plantings within the city. So at least that's something moving in the right direction, shall I say. We did have, this is talking about the urban forestry update on the position. We did have interviews. We had three candidates. 3 candidates. So we're in the process of going through the scoring, making sure which candidates to choose, and I'm hoping we'll be able to make an announcement before end of February, hopefully, if everything goes according to plan, to make an announcement of who that individual is on that. Other news is I know Chris was supposed to be on, and I know he's been working with Peggy on the tree canopy study, and also assisting the Tree Commission with some data to present to council. So again, the presentation has been moved back. I believe not the first week of February, not next week, but the 3rd week of February. Council has a new systematic approach of when we need to submit things, and all the reports need to be submitted at X date, and I shared that information with Peggy. So again, I know Chris has been working steadily with the Planning Commission, the Tree Commission on that. And I believe that is all the updates I have for the Tree Commission.
Thank you, Rion. I think I should have applied for urban forester.
You should. You should.
What I'm doing is his or her work. Huh?
Yeah, thank you so much.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. There was one other item, the U.S. Forest Service grant, and Chris did send me some information. I think there's nothing at the moment. He wanted to wait until the urban forester came in, and so we'll maybe look at that later. So good. All right, so I think, thank you, Rion. We'll move on to our 3rd item, committee organization and priorities. I just wanted to make some comments. I did ask all the chairmen of the committees to be conscious of the fact that staff is overworked. We don't have an urban forester. And we're down, we will be down. We may get 4 new people in April. Jeff and I are new. And so we have to be conscious of really how much we can get done this year. And so I've asked them to prioritize approximately 3 things, the most important things they want to do. The other thing to note is we do have chairmen of the committees, which is great. We've been twisting arms. And Mark Rylander has agreed to be chair of the Education and Advocacy Committee. Jeff will be, Aiton will be chair of the Arbor. And Codes and Practices, just lately, Vicki and Tim have been talking. Tim is, as you know, taking on a huge responsibility in the county. And he feels that he can't continue to be the full chair, but he is going to stay on. And so Vicki has agreed to be the organizer and manager of that committee. Tim is going to continue to be, because he has been and will continue to be on the steering committee for the comp plan and the zoning rewrite. But the other lucky thing is that we've got some people that are going to volunteer to help with codes who have lots of knowledge. One, Brian, he's said even though he has to go off the tree commission at the end of March, he's going to continue to help. We've got Paul Josie, who has lots of knowledge, and he just confirmed with me he'd like to continue helping. And then we have a friend of Paul's who wanted to apply to the tree commission. I met with him trying to convince him to do it until I found out he lives in Nelson County. His name is Keith Pitchford, but he is a preservation arborist, has lots of knowledge from DC and other cities about tree codes, and he's going to help. So Vicky's going to have lots of help, and particularly with Tim staying on too. So anyway, that's just a brief introduction. So Mark, will you just give us a brief description of what the priorities are for education and advocacy? And I think you had a change to one of our objectives too, one of the minor change.
Yep. Thanks, Peggy. I don't have the objectives in front of me right now. I have a mnemonic for remembering them, which is educate, advocate, collaborate, communicate. And there's a fifth priority is really relief project, the developing projects, executing projects. So what we talked about as priorities, one of the first things we wanted to do, Rihanna had mentioned sort of in beginning about the website and the multiple links there. I have a list I don't really have to go through, that just we want to make sure the links work on the site and review some of the content and make sure that our listing of open positions on the website is accurate. So that's just something we're going to take on within the committee. In terms of advocacy, speaking for at the budget CIP meetings in March is in our camp, and so want to prepare remarks for that. And there are a list of organizations within the city and nonprofits that we would like to collaborate with, and I think that's potentially just part of developing, an individual as a contact person. And some of these things will just become not necessarily a project or initiative for the year, but to have that set up so that the Tree Commission has kind of a standing list of collaboration contacts, and that any inquiries that come to us, we can handle through our committee. And then on the communication side, there are times throughout the year, kind of, we thought reviewing the calendar, that there would be great for the city to issue press releases, when we present to council and at Arbor Day. And there are a lot of these things we typically do, but just to be prepared for them, so that we have the kind of regularly scheduled Tree Commission milestones throughout the year, and that we can assist the city in communicating with those. And so I want to make sure that I am connected to the Parks and Rec, the web liaison who works within Parks and Rec, so that we have an open line of communication.
Good. Mark, there was the one objective that we wanted to change this a little bit. One of our objectives said maintain Tree Commission and urban forestry web pages. And again, we don't want to be your urban forestry, Rian. We wanted to change that to monitor and advise, because obviously we're not maintaining the web pages and social media. So that was the one we wanted to change that word. I think that was it, Mark.
Yeah.
Thank
Yep.
you.
And I didn't go into relief, which has been presented elsewhere, but that's in many ways is one of the bigger initiatives that we'll be working on this year.
Yeah. All right. Let's any questions of Mark? I'm just watching the time, so everybody has 10 minutes, but any questions of Mark? Great.
Mark, you inspired me to come up with a catchier summary of our objectives. That was good.
Just action, my dad once sent me just an article that was just a list of action verbs. So come up with action verbs.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. All right, so the next one is Arbor, and that's Jeff.
So our action verbs are maintain, review, manage, work, coordinate. Not quite as exciting as yours, Mark, but those are the action items that we have on our list. That first one is maintain and evaluate performance measures for the city trees through review of the commission's tree report, annual tree data report. The second one is review city arborist annual tree planting list. And we call them, and I think this is probably something to clarify, Peggy, do we say urban forester or do we say city arborist? And what is the nomenclature that we want to use going forward for that?
Rian, what do you think? We call it urban forester. That's what we're actually titled. Is that right?
Yes, that's the title.
Okay, so
That is the
we'll
title.
change that in our
Yeah.
in these goals. And that's the annual tree planting list. We have worked on that last year with the work plan, and that's part of what Rian is now instituting with the planting in February. The third item is that managed tree nominations process. We had some that we nominated this past year. Those got caught up a little bit in various processes, but we hope to, I think, re-enliven those and bring them back in this new year and maybe get them approved, but we'll have to see what that looks like relative to the Friendship Court development. And so I think part of what Arbor Committee could do relative to those nominations that we put forward last year is to look at them in the context of that Friendship Court development. I'd really love to see a detailed plan of that and see if those trees really can be preserved. So that is I think an important thing that we'll keep pushing forward. Work with city arborists and cats to commemorate a significant tree on Arbor Day. That is something we'll have on the books to do in the next couple of months, because that day will be upon us before we know it. And relative to that, Jean has had some thoughts about some added scope that might be potentially interesting between Earth Day and Arbor Day. And I've asked her to speak with Mark Z about that and how that might fit in and what that might look like and who to speak to and how to organize that. So she's gonna, I think, take that on in the next month. And we haven't talked about this, but maybe report out at our next meeting, Jean, if that makes sense. And then the fifth and final is coordinate with the urban forester on the urban canopy assessment. And so I'll go through a few slides that I put together based on this last assessment that we just got, and we can talk about those at that time, and then think about how we're going to use that in the next year to guide us. That's it.
Great. Yes, Jeff and Jean and Mark, on March calendar, on our next meeting, we will be talking about, what our plans are for Arbor Day. And both the Tree Commission and Relief, we have plans too. So we'll talk about that next time. Any
Great.
questions of Jeff? Boy, we're doing well. Okay, let's see. Codes and practices next. Tim has been organizing that. So tonight we're going to hear from Tim on what the codes and practices are up to. And I think we know the most important thing is looking at the zoning ordinance. That's an opportunity this year.
Exactly, Peggy. Yeah, we had a little bit of coordination between Peggy and Jeff Pacelli and I, and yeah, simplified some of the existing objectives and reorganized things a little bit. But really, the main thrust is just continuing to participate in the Seville Plans Together steering committee. At a high level, that means continuing to review the city's code and zoning ordinance and the standards and design manual, and just identify deficiencies and opportunities for improvement. Another effort would be to review the tree legislation and relevant ordinances in other localities to identify best practices that could be utilized here. or modified for inclusion in the zoning code review and rewrite. And then, kind of take all of that and draft a list of proposed recommendations to share with this whole commission. And then eventually, convey that and advocate for that with the steering committee, and ask the appropriate consultants who are leading that process to, make sure they focus on these issues and help develop solutions that could be considered for inclusion in the zoning ordinance and the city code. So all of that is really one of the main things that we need to be on top of. And it's pretty timely in terms of what we understand the timing of this steering committee to be. I think the latest message from the city is that the zoning process will begin in winter of 2022, and then kind of draft some material for public review and public engagement sometime in the spring of 2022. So we want to make sure that we get our issues identified and recommendations prepared on the front end of that zoning discussion, and make sure it's sort of available for thought and for review, while the issue is hot. Separate from all of that is really determining how the tree commission and the codes committee can best assist neighborhood development staff in the site plan review process, and just participate accordingly and provide advisory comments if we're able to do so. The tree commission's role in that respect has changed a few times, even since my 2 years on this commission. And there's been, staff changes, and the urban foresters yet to come on board. So we need to feel all that out in this new context. But determining if there's a role and then providing assistance in an advisory way would be another objective for this year.
That's great. We know that, the rezoning of the ordinance is going to be a big task, and we appreciate you taking it on. Any questions from Tim? For Tim?
I'd like to just volunteer maybe for the next code committee meeting. I know last year I periodically appeared, but Tim, your last comment about the site plan review process, I think it would be, a good task would be to have a kind of one-page checklist, ideally prioritized, of the things that we would want to see in every site plan, so that we could distribute that, to the team of people in NDS who review it, and that way, we're all kind of on the same page about what kinds of things we really want to see in that review. If it can be in print and regularly circulated around the room, it would help us a lot, I think.
Yeah, that's a great suggestion, Mark, and you're certainly welcome to join and assist. And I think having a checklist or a reference material would be a great tool if we're able to engage and participate, and then even weaving that into the zoning process, because the zoning code identifies what application requirements are to be included in site plans, and so there's a way to kind of approach that at the legal level and then at more of the administrative level.
Yeah.
And I think we need improvements at both, perhaps.
Yeah, it's trickier than it sounds because every project's so different, and the process for them is different if it's an SUP, et cetera, et cetera. So, but it's still a good goal, I think.
And just a bit of institutional memory on that. And Mark, you may remember before we got shut down by the pandemic, Paul, actually the last few months before Paul left the commission, he had actually put a spreadsheet together. So we'll try to dig that up. This way you've got some place to start. But Paul had made some effort on figuring out like what, and actually I think may have presented it. Mark, do you remember that? Were you on a meeting with him and NDS staff before? This would be like 2 years ago.
Well, Tim brought that forward actually, and I think it exists as a Google Sheet now that we have access to.
Good.
It's in the cloud.
Yeah, but it's a great starting point, an awesome resource, and we definitely want to build on that good work. Yeah. And the fact that Paul and others are willing to kind of help from a citizen role and contribute the work that they've done in the past and help us push this forward is super.
And to
Great.
Tim's point, obviously, there's a synergy between that and the zoning code rewrite. Because if we can get a little bit more teeth into that zoning code for trees, then there is a proper role for the commission. Not that it's not proper to advise, but I think a stronger argument to be made for the commission to be involved in that process.
All right. Thank you. So if there are no more questions, we'll go on to the canopy study. I'm probably sure, just like me, you are still digesting it. I read it or most of it for the second time today. It gives a lot of information, a lot of good graphics, and you may have questions, but we'll let Jeff start this. And Rian, are you there? He's not there. I've been asking.
Yes, I am.
Oh, okay. Just one of Rian. We may have suggestions, of course, for this report. I've been trying to find out from Chris. Can we suggest some revisions, or is their contract done? What is the status?
Yeah, so I believe what Chris mentioned the last meeting is that there'll be a 2-week of comment period. So I don't know if any of the commissioners have reviewed and gave Chris comments, because we still have the contract. I believe there's going to be a review and questions or suggestions. Give it to Chris Genzik. He'll take it to the consultant, and they will either look at your suggestions or add it into the report.
Okay. All right. Thank you. All right, Jeff, I'm sorry. I just wanted to clarify that. Jeff, you want
That's
to?
great. Yep.
Okay.
Can you all see the screen?
Yeah.
Okay. So we got a few comments back, and obviously based on what Rian has just said, there's still space for more comments to come in. Some of the positive things that came out of this is that there was strong emphasis on planting large, long-lived, low-maintenance trees. That's great. Peggy made the point that it looks like the urban tree canopy of 50%, which is a goal that we talked about in our last meeting, and that I think Brian and Peggy were going to present to council, is possible, given the possible planting areas, the PPA that is defined here in this urban tree canopy assessment. So I think those are positives. In terms of like critique of the assessment and the report, there are a number of things here that I think people pointed out that would be good to get more clarity on, and some of it is just confirming that acreages are correct for various numbers. Not anything really groundbreaking, but things maybe to focus on as they revise and make the final plan assessment. The general findings, I think for those of you who have read this, that they're pretty clear. 40% urban tree canopy, 22% of that, or another 22% is possible planting areas, and then 36% of the city is actually impervious surface, so not possible for UTC or that PPA. From 2014 to 2018, we've seen that decrease of 5% that we all knew about, 381 acres. That is a decrease of 7% on private lands and 3% on public lands. One of the things that I thought was kind of interesting, and I'd like to see how this plays out over the next number of years, is that they said that part of that decrease on public lands was the Meadow Creek Stream Restoration Project. Now, having lived adjacent to that, I know a ton of trees were taken out for that project, but now there are significant trees that are coming back into that space. So it's been heavily populated with young saplings. There are sycamores that are coming in all over the place there. So I think as that area is restored to its former glory, and this was a fantastic project, don't get me wrong. I think those trees had to come out obviously for the restoration work, but we're going to see a lot of canopy restored there, which is also great. Decrease also was due in part to development within the city. To clarify, the classes that they looked at were the urban tree canopy, other vegetation like lawn areas, soil, dry vegetation areas probably that are open for development, impervious surfaces, and then surface water. And those are broken out in this pie chart and in the adjacent chart. And I'll send this to everybody so you can take a look at it after, just as a kind of executive summary. What's kind of interesting here too, is we look at the urban tree canopy total acreage and the percentage of that acreage in the city, that 76% of that UTC is on private property. And that of the total possible planting areas that we looked at in that first slide, 75% of all of that is on private property, but there is 17% on city-owned property, 25% of which is school property. So there's all sorts of opportunities that it seems like are available to do planting in the next number of years. They also, as we've seen in other reports, they looked at the current UTC by neighborhood. I pulled that out into a separate list here on the side just because it's a little easier to read. Again, we're seeing 10th and Page and Star Hill as being at the lower end of that spectrum of urban tree canopy, with Greenbrier and Barracks Road at the upper end. This I thought was also an interesting chart, and I know I'm going through this quickly, and you guys can review this later, and people obviously can spend more time with this. But there are some interesting things relative to that UTC in the neighborhood. So these numbers are coming directly from here. So on the first line here, you see 10th and Page is 18% urban tree canopy. Of that, 9% is in the right-of-way, and that right-of-way has seen a slight increase in urban tree canopy since 2014 of 2%. We've seen significant loss in Johnson Village, though, in that right-of-way of 7%. And these numbers don't correlate. This is actually these 2%, 7%, 2 and 1 are all pulled from the report. They didn't actually summarize them here in this chart, which I think would be an interesting thing to see in a subsequent summary, is where those increases and decreases happened. Ecosystem benefits, I think we all know this. Air quality, stormwater benefits, carbon sequestration, these actually have monetary value associated with them. And they break those out in this little image. I've only got a couple more slides. Tree planting prioritization, I think, was an interesting one. And Mark Rylander had some interesting comments on this. They could do maybe a better job of showing how they have ranked each of these neighborhoods. But what they explained in the report was that they have combined ranks to show where these tree canopy benefits can have the greatest impact by addressing multiple needs. So they did a needs-based and looked at these particular benefits. So shows socio-demographic benefits, population of the neighborhood below poverty level, public property ownership, so percentage of PPA within the public land, so available for planting by the city. Environmental benefits, right of way, obviously greater benefits to air quality and noise if it's relative to or located adjacent to a roadway. And then looking also at urban heat island. So when they did all of this and they overlaid all of these criteria, what they found was that Rose Hill has the highest priority in terms of planning neighborhoods. And then the Meadows was also high, and then 10th and Page and Star Hill following not so far behind that. So to note again, 17% of all plantable space in Charlottesville is on city-owned property, where the city really has direct management capabilities. And 9% of that is plantable space relative to or in right-of-ways. So a couple recommendations potentially. Or number one may be that we should talk about when this next assessment happens. If it is really 2 years from now, the data that's going to be used for action items this year and next year will be 5 or 7 years old. So I think talking about like, is it within the city's capability to have another assessment of this quality done next year or the year after that. And I'm Peggy, I'm not as familiar with that calendar, but that's something I think it would be worth talking about. Again, that focus on Rose Hill Meadows, 10th and Page and Star Hill, when we talk about tree planting for fall and winter of 2022. They had some recommendations within the report about leveraging this for further investment and obviously monitoring and then maintenance. So helping Rion with staffing up for parks work and tree work. And then certainly working with urban forester when they're hired to prioritize that canopy expansion in these areas that have been defined as part of this assessment work. And then looking even more focused, because there's a lot of data that's in the background of this executive summary and of their assessment that really could be dialed into these particular neighborhoods and looked at very specifically to figure out where that tree planting needs to happen. And we did that a little bit last year, but I think given that this data is now updated, it would be fantastic to be able to pull it into GIS and look a little bit more specifically at particular tree planting locations. So that's it. Many questions? I can spin back through this, or I can stop sharing and we can see each other's faces again.
Thank you,
Jeff,
Jeff.
Thank you, Jeff.
Yeah.
So I'm sure it makes sense. I haven't quite figured it out yet, though, but that Star Hill and 10th and Page have less than 20% tree canopy, which, as I recall, it means that there are health detrimental effects as a result of that. And yet they are not the priority places for planting trees. Explain that again to me.
So I think they don't hit the highest level of priority, but they are like second tier. And I think it has to do with this combined ranking system that they're using. So there is population at below poverty levels. There is a percentage of PPA within public land. So it's saying, yes, these need to be planted more heavily, but where are the opportunities to be able to plant? And then ranking that. And that's part of the ranking criteria is it possible to actually do planting in these areas? And I think that's part of what they're trying to get at with this particular graphic. Does that make sense, Jody? It's sort of like saying, yes, the need is there, but is the where are the possibilities for the city to intervene?
Yeah, it makes sense on one level, but when health is challenged,
Right.
When it is at risk, it seems like that by itself raises it to the highest priority.
Which I think was Mark's question of like, how do you, and maybe he can speak to this, how do you combine these categories, and is one weighted more than another? And that's probably what we should have them fill us in on.
Because I'm seeing
It would put health higher, right, than everything else, which would be important. Yeah,
I'm just seeing this, the public perception of ranking 10th and Page and Star Hill as health risks because of the low tree canopy, and then turning around and prioritizing putting trees in Meadowbrook.
May I just say something quickly, Jody? That was one of my issues, but one of my questions was going to be, they've collected a lot of data and they don't have the health data. Now, I know that's hard to get. Richmond has done it, you know, and maybe that's why it didn't factor in here so much, but Relief actually is working with a doctor at UVA who thinks she can get the data, and similar to the way that they did in Richmond. So I want to let you know that, first of all, I don't know if the consultants could get that data, but we are working on it. And I agree with you that the health issue I hope that plays a big part. Sorry, Mark do you have a question? Are you through, Jody? I'm sorry, I'll call on
Yeah,
Mark.
yeah, I just, if it stays the way it is in terms of recommendations, we have to be very careful how this is presented publicly.
Yeah, I would say, I would kind of expect for there to be some kind of an appendix, or even if it's not immediately published, I suspect, having done this before as part of the Place Commission, that in these 4 categories, there are point values that might be assigned, like from 1 to 3, and you add them up. And that maybe certain items get a heavier ranking. It's like it gets 3 points if it checks that box instead of 1 point. It'd just be nice to know, I suspect it was something quantitative. I would hope it was a quantitative assessment and not simply kind of looking at all the data and then just sort of feeling it. So I think we might be able to ask, exactly how did they weight them or rank these things? Because as Jody said, it starts to look like we decided that health was important, but there were more open holes in some other neighborhood that didn't need trees as badly, and so that's where we put them. The reason I raised my hand initially was something actually different, and it was just before I forget, it feels to me like this canopy assessment somehow should make it into the Charlottesville Plans Together meetings with that consultant. It helps to kind of fly the flag of the tree commission, and these are great slides. And I think, maybe with a small group of us could kind of strategize how that gets presented or worked into the zoning discussion. Because I've been a broken record on this issue of setbacks, but if we can't get large canopy trees in the right of way because we allows 0 setbacks downtown, we'll never have downtown streets with large canopy trees. And we need something at a larger scale to show what we're talking about in that detail, or a cross section or something as a visual aid. And these graphs might be helpful in that regard as well.
Thank you, Mark. Brian,
Excellent,
I
excellent.
think Tim had his hand up first.
okay, sorry. Tim?
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, I'll jump in just to say that I agree with some of the preceding comments, and Jeff, you did a great job explaining that of those factors that went into those color-coded rankings, the PPA is sort of taking almost like a feasibility factor into it, and the rest of those factors seem to be just about the need, the amount of canopy that exists and other things. And so, I think it might be better if this didn't add that layer of feasibility to say, there's not enough public right of way, so let's prioritize Meadowbrook over 10th and Page, for example. Or we include that feasibility factor, but then make sure that it incorporates other factors that we know are critically important, like the public health for when tree canopies are under 25% coverage, and equity. We know that 10th and Page and Star Hill and Rose Hill are historically and predominantly Black neighborhoods, and the connection between past zoning and land use and lending practices and today's current lack of tree canopy, the maps are very, very similar, not just in Charlottesville, but in localities throughout Virginia and the US. And so if we could either keep it tight down to just the scientific assessment or broaden it, but include all of the relevant factors, I think either one of those is better than kind of having an incomplete or partially complete assessment, which that map looks like to several of us.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'd almost take off the table the what's available right away or on city property, and just say the need is so great that we have to work harder to get it in 10th and Page and Star Hill on private, public, whatever kind of land. We need more trees, and so we have to work harder, and don't just take the or factor in that what's available, what city property is available to be planted on. That's too easy of an out. it needs to tell us that we have to work harder to get it into those areas, trees into those areas.
And we have to keep in mind that, in our budget, we're not planting that many trees. So we really have like actual probably 2-digit numbers about how many trees we're planting in some of these neighborhoods. So, we to your point, Jody, we need to resist the thought that like there are 10 neighborhoods, so let's make sure that every neighborhood gets something. It's like, it's not that. It's like, let's put our money where our mouth is and plant them where the need is.
Okay, thanks, Jody and Mark. So Brian's been patiently waiting. Brian.
Yes, I think the messaging is really important, priority versus opportunity. And so to be clear about that. But we have to go back and also look at the contractor was given a specific list of criteria, which the commission developed with Mike a year ago. And I don't believe health was one of those because in the past that has not been criteria. So we'll have to check because it's not something that the contractor was asked to assess in the report. And when the RFP went out, if that is the case, then I'm not sure we can go back to the contractor and do that kind of overlay on this particular study. And therefore, it would make it all the more important that when this study, if the study has to go out, that we be careful about putting a map out there that says, these are our priorities. If we can't factor the health into it because that was not part of the contractor's charge, which I don't believe it was, then we have to find a way to finesse the language, whether that's removed. And there's a new map that says planting opportunities or some explanation, because otherwise it does undercut what we've been saying for the past 2 years at least. Also, this points out in visual form, the prime motivation, and Peggy has taken the lead on that with others, the prime motivation to get public-private partnership to go into those places that don't really have much opportunity and to plant on private land. And that's really been the tough nut that we've had to crack with those neighborhoods, is that there's not a lot of opportunity in the public space. We have to find a way to get it planted in the private space. So well, Peggy, I think we should just double check, go back and look at the list of criteria that the contractor was asked. I'll try to pull it up too. It was about a year ago, a little over.
And Brian, to your point, so this is one of those few opportunities where we can bring in an outside study to support the need for getting trees in Star Hill and 10th and Page and get a broader recognition or a broader audience to pay attention to us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
I just had one question, and thank you, Jeff, for putting together that summary. That was very helpful. There's a lot there. I just a clarification, because I know when our first eyes on this was back in the December meeting. And I know that Chris said, this is just fresh in. Staff's going to want to digest this more. So do any of the comments we see there, or is there, and maybe Ryan, since Chris isn't with us this afternoon, has staff prepared its own comments or questions? Because I know Chris had some really granular issues that he brought up in December. So is that factored into this, or is this strictly comments from the commission?
I haven't included any comments from anybody else, but
Yep, so Chris has some questions, and I believe he's working, also has his own notes on that as well, but I'll make sure for Chris to share his comments as well.
Any other questions? I'll just, if there's no other, just remind everyone, the tree commission, to get to the heart of the matter about the health that Jody's talking about. The tree commission was initiated Relief Seaville, and our purpose is, we make a big fat claim: trees save lives. Our mission is to protect the health and well-being of our low canopy neighborhoods from the heat impacts of climate change. So as Jody reminded us, that has been really something on our mind. So I'll have other questions I'll send to Jeff, but just a couple of comments looking at the canopy study. If I can find my notes here. One, it would be interesting. I know Jean often asked interesting questions. So Jeff showed you how it's possible to meet our 50% goal. But it would be sort of interesting to know how many trees do we have to plant, and what's a feasible year to meet that goal. I think we know Richmond has a 60% goal. I think they want to reach it in a year, it's 2035 or something like that. That would be sort of interesting. Again, I don't know if that's something it may not be in their wheelhouse, as Brian has reminded us. Another question is, I'm confused what they call right of way and where you could plant. I mean, they show that 10th and Page has a lot of right of way, but I mean, it was showed up green, but they have a 5-foot sidewalk right of way. But as far as I know, that's it. I know we had a hard time trying to find public right of way in 10th and Page. That sort of confused me a little bit. And I won't go into the other things, but I too I couldn't figure out exactly how they got the priorities. For instance, 10th and Page on all 4 of those criteria was very high, whether it was poverty, right of way, heat, I can't remember, but yet it didn't rank high. So, I mean, it's high, but not on the top. So I was confused. Anyway, so that's, but I really appreciate the fact that they've given us all this information, that we like the fact they've, as Jeff pointed out, large trees, low maintenance, low lived large trees will give us the most impact, and those planted where they can shade impervious areas to decrease heat and help with stormwater. So there are a lot of good things. And so Jeff, I think maybe you and I get together and get all of our questions together from everyone tonight and what you've shown so far, so we can have a consolidated information to give to Chris.
Thank you, Jeff, for the hard work you did to give
Yes.
this executive summary, because otherwise we wouldn't have caught it and wouldn't have been alerted to this issue. So thank you very much.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, that was wonderful. And Rian, you have another candidate for the urban forestry in Jeff.
Yeah,
So if everything falls through, it's either me or Jeff.
I've got a job already. I can have another one.
I don't have a job. I'm supposed to be retired. I do have a job. It's called the Tree Commission. All right. So thank you. We are doing pretty well here. So let's see. Brian, you're up next with our annual report to council. And I think as Rian mentioned, City Council has gotten very organized, and they've sent Rian a schedule of when they want to have reports sent to them. I think it's at least 2 weeks before we actually appear. So we didn't make the first cutoff. So we're now have to get the report to them by February 11th, and we'll be reporting to council on February 22nd. So Brian, you want?
Well, I don't have a lot more to add to that. I would say that even though we're a few months behind on our normal presentation cycle, it's probably not the worst year to be behind, because it's allowing us to digest this canopy study more and would be better prepared to answer any questions council might have. As Peggy pointed out earlier in the meeting, Chris and staff, and also working with, I'm not sure if he was working with Brian Ray on this, but did update charts and graphs. And so we have that now to put into the written report. So the written report, which I will send a final draft with that data in for the commission to look at in the next few days, certainly by the end of this week, incorporate any comments from the commission, and that will be ready to go to council by the 11th. The second part of the actual presentation, which is the PowerPoint, will go to council on the 11th as well. Well, Peggy and I are working on that jointly, so we'll try to get that out to commissioners to have a look at. The timeframe, the window may be pretty tight next week, so because we definitely have to make this February 11th deadline to get it to council. If we don't actually get the full PowerPoint presentation to council, last year there was a little bit of confusion because in the past we would present our previous fiscal year report and then come and summarize it in a PowerPoint presentation and then make our budget ask and make our staff requests, et cetera. And a couple of counselors at the end of last year's presentation said, well, we didn't see this. And so we're seeing it for the first time. So if we don't actually send them the full PowerPoint, whatever is in there that's current or prospective, we will summarize and submit it in written form to council ahead of the meeting. So when they see the slides, the information on the slides, they've actually been presented. I'm highly dubious, given the sheer weight of the packet that they receive for each council meeting, that might not be the best way, rather than give them a 29-page PowerPoint presentation and expect them to extract the data. So either way, we will get them what they need before the meeting, and Peggy and I will split up the duties. She'll have the bulk of the presentation duties for the presentation to council on the 22nd. Any questions about that? And then next year, which is this year, the normal schedule would be to make the presentation in November or December, depending on council's calendar. So as soon as we finish this one, it'll be time for you all to begin preparing next year's presentation. On that, I know, Peggy, you might have mentioned, I'm not sure if you mentioned this at the last meeting or if this was in conversations that you and Jeff and I have had during the transition meetings, that we are not going to be, since we don't have an urban forester, there won't be the semi-annual data collection reports this year. So you'll really be relying on your full annual reports, data reports.
Yes, I'm glad you reminded that, Brian. That's also on the calendar. I think we had a semi-annual data update. It was supposed to be in April, but since we probably won't have an urban forester till the end of February or March, that seemed to be too overwhelming for the new urban forester. So we pushed that later in the year. So you're right on that. Any other questions from Brian about the report or the presentation? Okay. Well, next item is Jean has done a good job of following some of our organizations involved in the climate, and many organizations that we want to stay in contact with. And there was recently a session called Climate Action Together. I'm going to let Jean explain it to you more, but it was a combination of the climate staff from the county and the city, as I understand it, got together and then invited all kinds of groups to listen in. We've also had some contact, and Jean and I are going to talk more of this about Seville Run 100 and whether the Tree Commission, how we might take part in that. If you remember from last year, Piedmont Environmental Council had a roundtable of environmental and client organizations throughout the city, and we met once a month just to update everyone. I was a representative from the Tree Commission on that, but PEC has dropped that. And so, you know, there isn't, the only other alliance that we know of that's has environmental groups, client groups, is Seville 100. So Jean and I are going to talk about that, and we can present some information next meeting on that. But in the meantime, if Jean could just tell us about this recent Climate Action Together session, that would be great.
Okay, there were two people representing the city, Susan Elliott, Climate Project Protection Program Manager, and Emily Palicia, the Deputy Chief of Emergency Preparedness. Out of the 8, there were 4 people representing staff from the county and 2 from UVA. It's too bad there weren't more from the city, because I think we sort of got underrepresented in that meeting. They discussed the 3 major types of hazards that they're anticipating and what's being done about them. I must say, on the balance, there was more talk about what the hazards are and what needs to be done than what's actually being done. Because it seems like both the county and city are kind of at beginning points in hazard planning, climate planning. All 3 hazards are already being experienced. And so I won't repeat, there was a lot of facts given about mosquitoes and heat waves and length of heat waves and so forth. I'm summarizing 2 hours of discussion. So I'm just going to give mainly a tree-focused emphasis on this, because trees kept coming up as a leitmotif in this discussion, abetted by, I think, 2 people from the tree commission besides myself must have been there, because they asked 2 really good questions, which got a lot of tree discussion going. Anyway, the first hazard is heat waves. And by 2050, we can expect twice as many heat waves, and each will last longer. We'll have twice the number of days with over 90 degrees. There's an interesting app from the University of Maryland Environmental Studies that by 2080, Charlottesville is expected, its climate, to look like Marshall, Texas, without any emissions reductions, and will look like Jonesboro, Arkansas, with some emissions reductions. So I have all of the, there are a lot of links that were given where you can go to like this app and you can see what city is going to look like in 60 years. Very interesting. We can expect, let's see, increase in heat-related illnesses, including heat exhaustion and heat stroke, crop, water, and animal losses due to heat, an increase in civil unrest, including violent crime and suicide. This is not a cheery discussion. Yeah, so then there's a whole long list of what could be done to mitigate this, prevent it or mitigate it, like establish cooling centers and ways to move vulnerable people to them during a heat wave, educates the public about how to identify heat exhaustion and heat stroke and what to do about it if you find that you have it. Develop a system for delivering portable cooling supplies. And then there's many other items they listed. One of them was the need to incentivize low impact development and more green space, plant trees. But again, the trees were a leitmotif. And then the question was asked about, what about trees? And Albemarle County said it's starting an urban forestry program, which would help increase tree cover and help with heat island effects. The county is also working on retaining forest cover through land conservation planning and easements, but they remarked that they will need a lot more than what's currently there now. I was a little taken aback because Susan Elliott said that she was not, in her words, super familiar with what the city's doing about tree coverage, because the city's urban forester is, I quote, over in Parks and Rec Department, as if it's another continent. She noted that one of the problems is that the city cannot plan on private property, but she thinks that the Tree Commission is starting to look at this. So I wonder whether we need to communicate and have better liaison with Susan Elliott in the environmental planning. Felicia said that she was really impressed by how the city came and helped her plant a tree on her property. And she said she didn't know that a lot of people, private property owners in Charlottesville, knew about this program. And that we should, one of the things we could do is help owners plant trees on their property. Okay. She also said that we need economic incentives to get developers to do underground utilities. And here she's referring to like the fire department having to take all those trees down from new buildings because they're built so close to the sidewalk, there isn't any room for fire trucks to get through. So that was another thing she suggested, and that I guess we're going to be working on too. I hope we'll be working on that. Now, the second danger was extreme participation in flooding. Number of emergency calls regarding flooding have almost doubled recently. And what we can expect in the years to come is increased precipitation with an increase in both the number and intensity of flooding, and with flooding shifting from county to urban areas. We can also expect increases in contamination of drinking water, wells, and waterways because of runoff. Then what needs to be done? Again, there's a long list. Educate people before flooding occurs that they have to be self-reliant for up to 72 to 96 hours, and help people who can't afford to prepare for that to be prepared. Minimize runoff with better stormwater management, permeable pavers, green spaces again, constructed wetlands to avoid flooding and toxic substances in waterways and drinking water and drinking water wells. Make the city more amenable to non-car transportation, encourage rainwater capture, which of course trees do. What's actually being done? The County Resilience Planning is looking into green infrastructure as a key to increasing drainage and prevent erosion, but there's no specific project yet. So they're really at the beginning of that. Policia mentioned that the city's stormwater tax is set up so that the more green space you have, the less tax you pay, which helps. Both city and county are involved in regional collaborative groups that are cohesive and have discussed flooding intensely for several years, planning for various events. Okay, I'm going to skip because I'm going on too long. The city has received state funding for community flood preparedness planning. The county is applying for such funds. And before they have to have a plan, and then they can start specific projects. Neither is there getting specific projects, but they're working on that first step of getting a plan so they can apply for specific projects. There's some discussion of rain barrel. There's a rain barrel rebate for capturing water for small plots. And then I mentioned that the Ragged Mountain Reservoir is designed to increase capacity over time. So that should help somewhat with flooding. The third major danger was seasonal change. Early morning in spring, later morning, early frosts, and warmer winters will impact both flora and fauna. Food security will be impacted by less predictable growing seasons. Pests can be active for longer periods so that, and again, like this has already happened, mosquito season has increased by 20 days in the last 2 decades, and it will go on increasing. So that insect populations increase, posing a threat to humans, wildlife, crops, trees, etc. The migration of plants and animals will change. Vector-borne diseases will increase and spread, and they talked about a lovely one called alpha-gal. I don't know if you've ever heard about that. Actually, if you get bitten by it, you're likely to then have you can't breathe when you eat meat as a result. And there's a nice link to discussion of these vector-borne diseases. So what needs to be done? We need habitat resiliency programs and land conservation, preserve landscape resiliency, and again, here's trees, forest cover, plant native species to help pollinators, increase plant diversity, and especially strong emphasis on keeping in mind what kinds of plants are going to flourish when we look like and feel like Texas or Arkansas. Educate the public about vector-borne disease. So they kind of ran out of space for this third one to talk about what they're actually doing. So I can't comment on that. The next steps, the city is working on identifying the city's climate vulnerabilities. First step is the development of a climate action plan, which I think started back in 2017, and it's really slow going. It will then explore what strategies and models can address these vulnerabilities. And there are lots of links that you can catch up on what the city is doing, and put yourself on a list that they will inform you about events. A city community outreach survey and workshop are coming soon. In the next 6 to 9 months, the county will be reporting on its vulnerability assessment, and people will be able to input data about their area regarding flooding and other hazards. Both city and county are especially interested in finding and using solutions that address multiple vulnerabilities. Trees, you know, so we have a real selling point there to these planners, and we really need to get the trees highlighted in these climate plans, action plans. And that's why I was a little alarmed that Susan Elliott seemed to be so remote from the tree commission and the urban forester in general. So that's all I had. That's kind of how it went. I can put the links, I can put this whole report up that has all the links in it, or put the links in the chat, or there is no chat, so I guess I can't do that. Yeah, there is a chat. I could put them in. I don't know what you want to do to getting more information.
Oh, thank you, Jean. That was very comprehensive. Maybe could we send out your report to the tree commission? It would have,
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure, I'll make sure all the links are in there. Especially, it's so fascinating to go look at what different cities that you know or your family lives in
Yeah.
are going to be looking like, and some of them are going to be looking like central Mexico,
Yeah. I mean, it's,
where my family lives.
as you said, it's not a cheery report, that's for sure, but you've
No,
covered
but
it.
it lights a fire under you, and it really, I mean, I came back with renewed passion for the tree commission because trees are so fundamental. And I think the very first recommendation at the end of the canopy report was promote, promote, promote. And I feel strongly that we don't do enough promotion. I'm tired of when I mention the tree commission, people look at me blankly, like they have no idea what we do. They have no idea of what's happening to the tree canopy. They have no idea what trees contribute to health. And so I'm really gung-ho to promote both within parts of the city government and work with environmental groups to get the word out.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. That was great. A couple of comments. When you mentioned about the lack of coordination between departments, Parks, NDS, and Public Works, we've been talking, the tree commission has been talking about that for a long time. I know Rian has heard about that too. So that, you know, the left hand knows of the right hand. We have a team knowing what all the departments are doing. Of course, we're particularly interested in the environment and trees. And on the front, the canopy study is something we need to get out. Charlottesville Tomorrow has already reached out to us to do an article about it. And so we're going to be on that. They're going to have an article. So other ideas we have of getting the Education and Advocacy Committee is working on ideas too, how we can get information out to the public. And as you know, Relief is starting with, particularly with young kids and families and teenagers, to teach them throughout the schools about the value of trees and nature in the city. So that's another, that's really where we're starting on Relief. And we've had some good success. And so just in answer to you, some of the things you talked about, you're right. Is there any other?
One of the things I learned recently, I started an environmental newsletter, a weekly one with my church, and to try to motivate people in my church to start taking action on various things. And I've been reading the sort of how about communicating with about the environment. One of the things I keep hearing over and over again from people who are experts at that are saying that you don't move people by fear or facts. You move them by a positive future scenario, because our brains are wired to seek rewards, not punishment. And so that's what I'm trying to focus on with my newsletter. And I think somehow we have to know how to write those stories that tell people and will light up in their heads about how they can get involved and do something to achieve this positive future. And so, you know, things like telling them that they're going to be living in Texas or Mexico, or they're going to not be able to eat meat because they've been bitten by this tiny tick, which is in our area, by the way, because there was a doctor at the meeting and he said you have to check for ticks now 10 months out of every 12 because they're surviving so much longer. And that's the kind of thing that, you know, you can't scare people, but there has to be a positive vision, which is why I'm trying to get a fix on how can we set goals where we say, not tell them the story. We have to do something because the trees numbers are plummeting, but rather we can move toward this 50% or whatever we're going to have, but have a story, a goal, a positive, doable something that people can get excited about. And I still haven't heard that. I really haven't heard that story. And I just want to have the story so I can tell it and sing it in 100 different ways.
Well, thank you. We look forward to you dancing and singing it in 100 different ways. Is there any other questions from Jean? All right. Thank you, Jean.
Okay.
Let's see. So we're ahead of schedule. You might be able to eat dinner earlier tonight. So the next thing is any comments from the public? I think Remy is monitoring that.
Yes. If you'd like to speak to the commission at this time, you can click the raise hand icon in your Zoom webinar. If you're joining us via telephone, press *9. Each speaker will be given 3 minutes to speak. And Madam Chair, there are no hands raised at this time. Oh, there we go. Rachel Keene, you are on with the commission. Can you hear us? You'll need to unmute your microphone.
Okay now? Can you hear me now?
Yes, we
Yes, we
can.
can hear you.
This is my first time to attend a meeting of the Tree Commission, and I really enjoyed it. And I thank you for all the work that all of you are doing. I'm a tree steward. I'm past president. I was president in 2020. And I was asked by Kendra Hall and Tony Wyckoff, who worked on the 10th and Page tree planting. And I guess all of you know they did succeed in planting. I think maybe Mark Zollenhofer can help me here. I think it was about 10 trees that they planted on private property in the 10th and Page area in late November, early December. So I resonated with Jean's point that if you can at least say something positive that's been done and then, you know, and plan ahead from there and keep going. So Kendra and Tony and I and other tree stewards are eager to keep helping on the 10th and Page project. That's all I wanted to say.
Well, thank you, Rachel. We are keeping very close touch with Kendra and Tony, and they've been terrific. And I know they've planted most of the trees, I think, on their own. But Relief is working with them because we want to, by fall of this year, hopefully be able to plant a lot more trees there. And that's why we started actually with the children at Venable, and we're working with the children at the City of Promise too, first, to get them excited about trees and hopefully encourage their families to plant them. We're working on getting teenage ambassadors in the 10th and Page neighborhood to go out with volunteers, both from the Tree Commission and the tree stewards, to knock on doors this summer. We'll actually pay them through the City of Promise because we think that'll open more doors. We want to teach these teenagers about the value of trees and also how you approach people. And so we'll be working on positive messages about trees. And so we appreciate all the tree stewards, what they're doing, and we're working very closely with them. So thank you. Is there any, oh, well, Chris has it. Is there any other public members?
There are no more hands raised at this time from the public.
Okay. Chris, you've got your hand raised.
Can you hear me?
Yeah?
Okay, good. I was driving back from a Rockfish Valley meeting and I've been listening to the whole meeting, so I've heard all your discussions. I just wasn't able to speak while driving, so I just got home where I got Wi-Fi and logged in. So I have all the words you guys have said about stuff and some thoughts and stuff we can follow up with tomorrow, the next day, about the council presentation, the canopy study, how to do the storytelling and the data stuff. So I've been here the whole time. I just wasn't able to speak in. So.
Well, thank you for letting us know that. And Jeff, the other Jeff, we keep saying Mark R and Mark Z, and we got Jeff P and Jeff A. The other Jeff, I just reminded me too, he had a meeting that he had to travel to. He was going to try to phone in and listen, but I guess he couldn't. So I wanted to let you know that he did try to join. Rian, you have your hand raised, Rian?
Yep, just two small positives. Just completed a donate button for trees on our website, and I'm working with our marketing team is to market that. I believe there was a comment during the CIP work sessions about that. Park staff looked at it, and we have now a method of, instead of using a check, you can actually use a credit card. So we're moving closer and closer to the year 2022 in Parks and Rec. Also, we took opportunity to also do a donation button for trails. Chris Genzick's side as well. So we just work more with our marketing in order to do that.
Thank you. That's great. More positive news. And Rian, your hand's still up. Okay. Brian?
That is really good news. Listening to all of the sort of threads of the conversation tonight, the real possibilities lie in private planting, public-private cooperatives. So to Jean's point, the messaging is not just about public trees. It's also about reaching out to people as to what they can do on their own property. We don't have the authority. We're not like some places. We don't yet have fines for developers to pay. We don't have huge funds. But when we look at this canopy study and we realize going forward, what's the biggest bang for the buck? It appears to be that it is on private property. And also, where are the bucks going to come from in the future? We can set goals to plant 600 trees. We have to have money to plant 600 trees. The city doesn't have those resources. We're hoping that the resources will increase. But really, to get that tree canopy up and get those numbers up, we need to use all these tools. So raising funds from the public to pay for public trees is great, but also things like Relief Seaville, we actually are bringing in private money to plant on private property is in some respects even more important goal. And so to tie the messaging into that goal is critical. To Jean's report, there was a comment, I don't know if it was a participant, a woman who was talking about planting on her property and getting a tree from the city. Just for those of you, because we haven't done this for 2 years, and hopefully working with the tree stewards, we'll be able to do this again, but that was another opportunity where the city provided some resources. We provided the sweat equity, the tree stewards. We raised funds, the tree stewards, through grants, private grants, and we actually went into the Belmont neighborhood, as some of you will recall, and planted there. And so while there's, just to be clear, since this is a public meeting, there is no city program where the city will take city funds and go and plant on private property. But we have done things in the past, another type of public-private initiative that is another way of working with citizens and showing them the importance and the benefit of trees on their property. Unfortunately, the pandemic, slowed that process down, but that's besides Relief Seaville, there's another opportunity to go back with tree stewards in the city. And it's another conversation we can have with Parks and Rec staff in terms of like what resources is it possible for the city to provide us if we have that situation where we raise the funds, we have the sweat equity, and we need that little extra bit of effort. The projects in Belmont were successful. And I think, that's something that we can look to do in the future. So there are a lot of positive things out there, and messaging it is very important. And by the way, Gene, just so you know, if anybody listens to our local public radio, there are armadillos down in Roanoke that have made their way up, that can now live. They used to come up on trucks and railroad cars, and they'd get off and they'd freeze to death. And now people are seeing armadillos, which is, as we know, a Texas animal that has now found its way into Southwest Virginia. So people are actually seeing that happening. And that's actually really frightening if you think about it.
Thank you, Brian. Jean, did you want to say something?
I have a question. Has the Tree Commission ever tried to identify some key major donors, private donors? For
Well, certainly
major donations?
Relief Seaville is certainly identifying, or is going to, particularly working with the Nature Conservancy, identify. We've already talked to a couple major donors. Now, again, this is for planting on private property, but as Brian pointed out, and the Canopy study points out, that's a huge impact. That's where we can make a huge impact, because I think I can't remember, Jeff, but it was 70% or something available land is really on private property for planting. So we're going after those donors for private property planting.
We've had a few for city properties, just here and there. Ballyshannon with Fred Scott, and a neighbor down in the Riverview area has donated to the city to plant on public property, but it's a rare thing, so we could do better on that.
And Ballyshannon also provided money for the Belmont private plantings.
Yeah.
And then, that's a fund that, we and tree stewards know it well, but that's a fund that is always an opportunity for us to go back to working with the tree stewards. There needs to be a lot of tools in the toolbox. There's just no one tool that's going to solve this.
And I think Brian always reminds us too, we don't want to let city council off the hook as we want to continue to have money. It's a public benefit. Trees are, as we all know, are public benefits, and they're as important as roads and sidewalks and all the other infrastructure. And we want to make that point to city council that trees are green infrastructure, just as important as anything else. Protect them and plant more. So, we don't want, we want the whole public represented by the council and the budget to continue. So any other comments? We got items and announcements not on the agenda. Is there anything?
I saw Jody's hand a minute ago.
I'm sorry.
No, I've been sitting here pondering something in my mind and turning it over ever since Jean mentioned it in her report. It's an item where someone in the city recommended financial incentives for undergrounding utilities, and presuming that that's a benefit for trees. I don't know that it is. With the traditional kind of spacing that's required between utilities and tree roots, when you have no setbacks downtown, that means you're not going to have any trees if you underground all the utilities. And so what my point I'm trying to get to is that I think that's a traditional that kind of spacing was established by utility professionals that just wanted to protect their utilities and don't think and got the most they could possibly ask for. I really think that there needs to be a study and pushback on city utilities to take a closer look at that kind of spacing, because it would be nice to get utilities underground, but not if it's going to mean that we're going to have to 50-foot wide, dead space because nothing's allowed above it. Nothing's allowed to be planted above them. I think we just need to, I would suggest that in the future, the city needs to revisit their kinds of spacing for underground utilities and even, can they be placed over top of each other? We just have to be more creative about how underground utilities interact with the trees above. So just a comment.
That's an interesting point I hadn't thought about. And I know that Paul used to talk often about the right of way or the easements for utilities and how much land it takes up. And then you can't have, how close can you plant trees to it? That was something he always talked about. So that's something to put on the radar of the codes committee to look at that, because that's part of the zoning ordinance. But that's an interesting, we all think undergrounding utilities is a good thing, but I haven't necessarily connected it to the fact we may have less trees then.
Yeah.
So,
Well, if you
really-
can put them
So,
if you can put them in the street, that works great, but
Yeah,
oftentimes
so-
they don't want to, right? I mean, they want to stick it where it's easiest to put them.
Exactly. Yeah. They don't want to inconvenience traffic if they have to do any work. The
Right.
heck with it.
so that's an excellent point, and it came up. I served on the steering committee for the East High Street streetscape, and we were cautious advocating for undergrounding utilities until at some point in the process it became clear. Now this could have changed because this is a few years back and that hasn't been built yet. But when it appeared that there would be less cost for purchasing private property for right of way and more money in the budget, then the subject became, and then the plan became to put the utilities in the roadway. So if you can advocate for that, and oftentimes it's a budgetary issue, right? Especially for these, big new VDOT smart scale projects. But in that case, and again, that was 2 years ago, and they're still purchasing, or I don't know where that project is, and they haven't constructed it yet. But that was one of the bright spots that came out of that project at that point, which is we can actually remove the overhead lines. We can actually plant larger canopy trees on 9th Street heading towards Belmont Bridge now, because we're going to put the utilities in the street. It's on my list to follow up on to see if that's still the case, because the trade-offs are not that great, as Jody points out.
Good point. Thank you. All right. The last item on our agenda is action items for next meeting. On our calendar, we'll have a report from the Arbor Committee about Arbor Day celebration. We'll receive a report from Relief Seville for the plans for Arbor Day. And then we want another big item. We want to plan for our April meeting with NDS and Public Works staff. And I think that that's going to be important to, as Brian mentioned, I think last time, we probably want to zero in on the zoning codes and how we can make them better. And we've also gotten 2 requests from the public. One to look at the new Rivanna Water and Sewer, where they want to plan this new line. And I can't remember exactly what it's called, but through the city, particularly people are concerned about the fact that it's going to go down Jefferson Park Avenue and other streets, right of ways that have lots of trees. To Jody's point, why can't they put it in the street? Maybe. The other request from the public asked us to look at the data center landscape plan, which everyone seems to be excited about, but there's needs to be some coordination between the city and that project about planting trees on Emmett Street. So those are things I think we should asked from NDS. So anyway, those are the three things that will come up, and I'm sure there'll probably be others at our next meeting. But did anyone else have any particular thing that we wanted to, items for next? I'm sure after I look at Jeff's notes about tonight, we'll probably have other things, but does anybody have any thoughts?
Well, if Public Works is going to be at the April meeting, I think one of the things we could discuss with them is utilities.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
You know, at least begin that conversation and remind them of how important that is if we're going to boost our tree canopy on right of way.
Good point. So I don't know, Tim and Vicky, if
It's the southern route. If you've all followed, it's the southern route from Observatory Hill through JPA Cleveland, across Fifth Street extended. And then it ends up coming actually down East High Street into Pantops. That's the large water line they want to put in. I think it's a $32 million project. Raise your hand if you heard about this before now or before you read it in the paper. Did you know about it? Well, Jody knows everything that's going on, but before it was in the newspapers, I think it took a lot of people by surprise for a huge project. And when they asked for a public comment from, I'm pretty sure it was RWSA on it, they said, well, we'll be interested now in what the public has to say about this preferred route. And then they listed all of the considerations that went into that route, and the word tree did not appear once. I'm not shocked by that, but again, this is a major, major public works project. And by that, I'm not saying Charlesville Public Works necessarily, but it's a major project that suddenly appears on everybody's radar very late in the process. And I want to thank Paul. I think a few of you know that Paul Joseph did send some comments to them on this. And so I think it's really critical that the tree commission follow up with comments as well.
This is Chris. Do you want an RWSA representative at that meeting as well? Because you're right, it's not necessary. I'm sure city utilities will coordinate, but if you want to have that talk about utilities, RWSA runs on Moores Creek, Meadow Creek. They come through the city with their big interceptors for sewage and for water. So if that's the case, we need to make sure to invite somebody from that authority as well as the city folks. So just let us know so we can make the invite.
I think that would be fine, but I also think we need to check. I know we have a lot on our plates, and Peggy's sort of doing a wonderful job of getting us through all of these heavy documents. But if we have to comment, if we have to weigh in before April, which I think we should figure out, coordinate like what our comments are on this. At least a letter or a memo saying we take note of the fact that there was no consideration for the urban forest at all in this plan.
Could we get them in March? Because it seems like it's going to be it would be too much to have NDES Public Works and Rivanna Water and Sewer Authority all at the same meeting. But if and it would suit the timing if we could get Rivanna at the March meeting.
If that's the commission's will and you've got the time, I know who to invite. So my first review of that, and I've seen it was a lot in the street, but you'd want to have a person tell you that definitely in the street or it'll affect trees. So if you want them in March, let me know soon. I know who to ask.
all right,
Yeah, and could you also find out, like, and we can check too, like, is there any real public comment period on this? Like we can actually submit something in writing. That was unclear from the news article. It seemed like the decision was made, and now after the fact, we'd be interested in hearing from people.
yeah, that's what the
I
news.
can find out. Yeah.
Yeah. And
Chris-
the concern for JPA, for those of you who are new to the commission, and this happened actually before I came on the commission, all right, is that we did plant a little arboretum of trees there and tag them. And that was a project working with tree stewards, I believe, and others. So there is concern that there's one place where actually some work to not only plant trees, but to educate the public may be undone by a public works project.
You're right. Thank you, Chris. I think Jeff and I will talk tomorrow and then we'll get back to you, but it does sound like we want to talk to them. And the article was rather strange. They made the decision, it seemed like, without any public comment, but now they're asking for public comment. So let us get our heads together tomorrow. We'll get back to you. It seems like maybe a good idea, as Jody suggested, to do it in March. So thank you for bringing that up, Brian. And I will send out Paul's comments to all. I think he only copied me. Because Paul's looked into this, so I will get those to you. Jeff, did you write that down? I'm going to forget to do all these things. I need to send Paul's comments. So unless there's any other news or comments, we can adjourn the meeting. Do I have to ask for approval to adjourn, Brian?
You have all the authority to send us home.
Oh, good. And to dinner. So it looks like there's no more public comments or commission comments. So I think we're done. Thank you. Thank you for your
Thank you.
report, Jeff and Jean particularly.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Have a
Okay.
good
Very
night.
much. Good night.
Bye.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. All right.